Throughout history, people have gathered a great deal of entertainment from comic books, and there has always been one publisher out there that to me has stood out above any of the others. Join me as I take you along this very brief history of one of the most influential comic book publishers in existence. This is the DC history. In 1934, National Allied Publication was founded by Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson. During this time period, NAP started namely with adventure comics, and then they went into action comics, and then into detective comics. In 1938, probably one of the greatest superheroes, if not the greatest superhero, was created. His emergence would reawaken the idea of the classic superhero told during the old Greek fairy tales, and launch two very lucky men into comic book history. This is the rise of Superman, created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. His arrival would also mark the beginning of the golden age of comic books for DC. This is a span that lasted roughly between the late 1930s and the early 1950s. And it would also cause the emergence of some of the best DC, comic book characters ever created, such as Batman, or Wonder Woman, or Captain Marvel. And what characterized the Golden Age wasn't just the arrival of these characters, but for the first time, comics were actually seen as a major art medium. It was actually seen as having validity. It wasn't just for children anymore. It was aimed also towards adults. And as for that reason, during this time period, superhero comics ruled the comic book world. According to Bob Adelman's Will Eisner, A Spiritual Life, one of the leading reasons why superheroes of this time period were so influential and so iconic was because that they actually dealt with real-world issues going on at the time. During the early 1930s and the late 1930s and the early 1950s, we were dealing with mainly the atomic age, namely World War II. So during this time period, we had heroes who would, let's say, fight communists overseas. We'd have characters that had abilities derived from atomic radiation. Probably one of the most iconic views of this was the 15-minute Superman short back in the 1940s, where it pitted Superman against the Atom Man. And they also had a radio show spin-off of that where he also went up against the Atom Man again. But unfortunately, with the ending of World War II, superheroes kind of fell out of mainstream. They weren't necessarily needed anymore. And during that time period, a lot of comic book publishers decided that they would go and try and look at different genres, such as horror or Western. Some of them just also went off into different science fiction categories. However, inevitably, superheroes did make a comeback. They had a re-emergence in the spotlight between the 1950s and the early 1970s. This would be called the Silver Age. The Silver Age would be marked by the rise of a DC character too fast for any vehicle or any weapon. In showcase number 4, The Flash would make his modern-day appearance. And because of his success, the staff at DC decided to bring their old characters back to life. They would simply be tweaking the way they looked and their location. And it's for that reason why people started referring this time as the Silver 60s. With DC success came the realization that superheroes were not out yet. Marvel jumped on this and created characters with very sophisticated storytelling and characterization. With the success came the creation of team superheroes. DC started with the JLA, the Justice League of America, and in response to that, Marvel came out with the Fantastic Four. And the Fantastic Four would later create an amalgamation for Marvel, which would create the Avengers, basically a compendium of all their superheroes. The comic historian Peter Sanderson sees DC during this time as being akin to a major Hollywood production facility. And according to Will Jacobs, the comic book heroes from the Silver Age to present, due to the reinnovation of the superhero genre, Sanderson believes that in the later years of the 60s, DC was the product of creative drought. It is for that reason why Marvel is seen as being more of a French New Wave. They had different and innovative ways of creating characters and telling stories that DC at the time didn't do. Will also believes that the Silver Age ended in April 1970. The biggest reason for this theory was that comics during this time became more serious. Namely the Green Lantern, who was pretty much the poster child of that time as being the can-do kind of attitude person. He went from very joyful and being able to do anything to being older, wiser, and considered by many to simply just be unhappy. This movement into the more serious realm of storytelling marked the end of the Silver Age and the beginning of what we call the Bronze Age of comics. This age would see the retirement of most of the comic book veterans of the time, and it would enter more of the younger guys who had a much more grittier feel for storytelling than the original everything's happy-go-lucky from the Silver and Golden Age. With this shift in writing and creative control came the revelation that not all heroes were white. Surprisingly, there are black people out there. And up until this point, Black Panther and Falcon were the only notable minority superheroes to have ever come up in any major media. For that reason, DC came up with Cyborg, Vixen, Black Lightning, and Bronze Tiger, if I remember correctly. And many people actually gave criticism for this, as they thought comic book companies were trying to somehow revitalize this weird sort of black exploitation that was happening, which wasn't necessarily the case. This actually form of media had vanished before these comic book characters had even come out. And during this period, comics also saw a difference within the art forms. If you look at the graphic novels JLA Final Frontier and Kingdom Come, you'll notice that in JLA a lot of the art is more cartoonish. There isn't an emphasis on realism and muscle tone and really cool shading, things of that sort. When you go to Kingdom Come, the anatomy is all there. As you can see, a lot of muscles, a lot of definition to the characters. They do have a more realistic look than the more cartoonish feel of Final Frontier. And probably one of the most profound events that also happened during this time period was crossovers, actually. Marvel and DC created character crossovers, such as Superman versus the Amazing Spider-Man, Batman versus the Hulk, or X-Men versus the Teen Titans. There was supposed to be an Avengers versus the Justice League of America, but due to the growing animosity of the two companies, that was quickly halted. In the mid-1970s, DC went toe-to-toe with Marvel in trying to create a comic book explosion, And basically what had ended up happening is that DC started creating a large quantity of comics without actually making a large quality of comics. The backlash from it actually almost caused an implosion, and it almost broke the spine of DC, and the company was almost lost. However, good news did happen, though, because DC had just finished up their special event, Crisis on Infinite Earths, which revitalized the company, put faith back into it, and they were able to once again compete with Marvel on a very high, realistic level, like they should have always been able to do. It is unclear where the ending of the Bronze Age actually is. A lot of people actually feel that it hasn't actually ended yet. Some people think that it ended with the release of Watchmen, where you get characters where it just wasn't enough that they were flawed. They were also sociopaths, and it was very unclear where the line of good and evil was ever drawn. And today, DC is booming. The latest update from them is that they're doing a relaunch of all their comic book titles. What this means is that all comic books are going to be stopped where they are in their story. Everything's going to be ended, and then everything is going to restart right back from the origin. And there are a lot of mixed feelings about this. I, for one, like it because the idea of paying thousands of dollars for the original issue of something just to read it, well, I just don't have that kind of money. I want to thank you all for joining me. You all have been so very wonderful, and I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you very much. Have a good night.